gosh, we have a lot of panels up here today. But I'm going to have to actually kind of bring it back because I want to make sure we have an opportunity because we have some really amazing experts up here. We didn't even get a chance to cover even like 10% of the topics we really wanted to cover today. And so I want to make sure that anything that's most pressing for you that you want to ask these experts while we have them all in the room, you have a chance to do so. So is anyone ready with a question? Oh, yeah. Wait, Rob, dude. So yeah, so go ahead, Rob.
It's not working. Is it working? It's working. Oh, wow. I'm deaf then. First of all, I wanted to give a shout out to Mayor McGee and his leadership of the Commuter Rail Community Coalition, and to Mass Inc. and everybody who's been working on Rail Vision. And thank you for to the Fiscal Oversight Board for their first step, which is, again, just the first step. So there's a lot of stuff that we want to advocate for. But there's another big advocacy issue that's on the horizon that I want to give a plug to and to hear your responses is the rollout of 5G. Commuter rail is great about getting people, or turning regional rail, getting people moving around is great, but we need to build out infrastructure in our communities, especially low moderate income communities, gateway communities, to support 5G, because that's where we're going to see a lot of business growth and business development around. I'm quietly, not me quietly, I'm advocating that there should be a policy within the Commonwealth to support that, for every 5G network that's rolled out in Brookline and Cambridge and Back Bay, that there should be 5, 10 that are going out into gateway communities. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I told you.
Yeah, I know. Just put it really close.
Okay. Do my lounge act. So investment in gateway, there should be a policy within the Commonwealth that supports 5G in gateway communities, whether that's through incentives or self-reporting or other mechanisms. And I wanted to know if the panel had some thoughts on how we make sure that our communities don't get left out and it's just Back Bay that has 5G.
I'll keep it.
Okay. So, who would like to take this on?
Is this on? Okay. Rob, thank you. I think and I'm going to repeat a tiny bit of what I said earlier, but the reimagining of the commuter rail is this. It's like the creation of the subway was 100 years ago. It's this unbelievable opportunity, not just for in and out of Boston, but hub to hub and just a whole variety of things. I'm so glad that you raised the telecommunications 5G issue. I believe it is going to be the have or have not issue that we have yet to address. Tied into that is how information is shared in order to take best advantage of the different transportation options. I don't have solutions for you, but I think that this is one of the issues that it has to be addressed. I became very involved before I left the Baker administration in trying to bring internet service to Western Massachusetts, and it just highlighted to me the absolute have and have not issue there, where kids were outside their schools in terms of doing their homework. Businesses couldn't compete in the same way. And on our commission, one of the commission members from Springfield said, who was running the Regional Transit Authority there, said, we used to lose our buses. And we said, what do you mean? That once they got out of downtown Springfield, they didn't know where the buses were. They couldn't say whether they were on time, whether they were broken down, et cetera. And that just highlighted there in relatively dense Springfield what that meant for the state. So getting on top of this now is going to be what you can do with the private sector, which should be the largest place where this should be. But what should the state incentives be? What should the state dollars be? it's the issue that yet isn't burning but will be soon. So thank you very much for raising it.
5G is just the conversation about broadband and the iteration that technology is rapidly changing. Solution, don't wait on Beacon Hill. Do not wait on the federal government. Collective action, there's no reason why all the gateway cities can't come together and figure out a way to create an authority where together they can build out their 5G and broadband systems. In a town like mine, Thomasville, Georgia, literally 20 minutes north of Tallahassee, population under 35, in the 90s, recognizing that internet was going to be the future for them, actually created their own Southwest Broadband Authority. And over time, actually allowed smaller rural communities to partner, to then, through their collective action, expand broadband to now over 1 million rural residents in Southwest Georgia. And it has become a profitable company to the sense that now they can reduce property taxes and make transportation fees waivers. I say that to say they did not wait on the state government, they did not wait on the federal government, because Atlanta is going to move, DC is going to do its thing. You have the power to work together. And I just want to emphasize that you have collective action, but it really requires some level of shared vision.
Hi, Craig Blaze from Worcester. Welcome, all of you, to the largest gateway city. I just want to put this out. One of the panelists talked about the importance of timing to the market for affordable housing and development. We got into the, WBDC got into the housing business about 9 years ago, and we've done 2 projects in 9 years, 88 units and 55 units. And in both projects, we went through 3 rounds of the one-stop and 9 rounds of state historic tax credit allocation. The time to market, and we created 130 units. That doesn't work. There's a huge demand in the gateway cities for all levels of housing. We just completed a study, 3,000 in Worcester. We're not going to get there with those types of process.
So what do you guys recommend for kind of helping to further streamline the process?
I don't know anything about 5G, so I'll cover you guys who don't know a lot about housing subsidies. Earlier, I was going to say the one thing you can build in a market that is weak or building is affordable housing, right? Because it's subsidized. And I was going to say it in the context of the reason you can build it is because there are subsidy programs, federal and state. That's a choice, right? Putting the subsidy into other places can make those things happen. But that's not the question Craig's asking. He's basically raising the problem that there's not enough subsidy, so there's a very, very long line you have to wait in to get it. And every developer that I know who builds affordable housing would build a lot more if they didn't know they can only get 1 financed a year. 1. If you get 2, that's like 303 difficulty. So we need to figure out some ways to subsidize housing that does not rely on low-income housing tax credits, which is what that powerful tool is that everybody has to go through that door. And I think the answer lies in building some of those sort of public-private partnerships to put subsidy in some different forms that can move faster. And I would love to convene some people to talk about how we do that.
Thank you. I just wanted to, is it working? Yep. No? Just a follow-up. Thank you, Karen. I mean, I do think I'm not above asking people to lobby the federal representatives, because we have been arguing for 3 or 4 years to increase the low-income housing tax credit. There simply isn't enough. Massachusetts uses them very well, and the wait time is difficult. So my question then goes, and particularly to Chris, because housing is such a long time frame to put together, have you seen attempts to create land banks to land bank some of the properties near transit that gets developed so that it can then later down the line be used for somewhat below and deeply below market uses?
The answer is yes. Land banking is how many people are familiar with land banking, the concept? Okay, good. I don't have to talk about it a lot. Yes. However, I would challenge you, Barbara, in the sense of land banking being the only solution. Low-income housing tax credit is great, but even doubling the low-income housing tax credit would not meet the need for affordable housing across the country. The level of regulation and minutia that it takes for the private sector to get any public incentive or subsidy is a challenge. So since you brought up the conversation around advocacy, I just want to put this out there. Very soon, we're going to advocate for, Locust National is advocating for a national neighborhood rehab tax credit, which essentially says, if you remember the historic tax credit is 20%, right? Remember back in the day, you used to have a 10% credit. As long as your building was old, you can check the box, right, and use 10% of it for rebuilding. You didn't have to go through all the minutiae, go through the Park Service or talk to Treasury, right? Well, we're basically working with a bipartisan coalition of members, recognizing that gateway cities, like here in Worcester, like Erie, Pennsylvania, and other places where I'm from, where we're saying we need to give developers that same ease to retrofit existing old buildings near passenger rail and transit. And on top of that, and here's the key, and this is where I think it's really transformational. Unlike any current community development program, whether it's historic, low-income housing tax credit, or even new markets, none of the tax credit programs actually allow the developer to address infrastructure. And so now the rehab credit that we're introducing will allow a developer or a taxpayer rehab a building that's at least 50 years old, that's within walking distance to transit, and they can claim the infrastructure improvements, the wastewater, the sewer, the sidewalks, and adjacent properties. And on top of that, that's at 15%. If you're providing additional affordable housing, you get an additional 10% bonus on the affordable housing QREs. That is game-changing. Now, if you want to advocate for something, advocate to your federal policy leaders, but also advocate your state leaders the truth. Nothing we're doing right now is going to solve the problem unless we get serious about changing the system itself to promote the thing that we want. There you go.
I'm going to give a different take to this. I have a serious problem with the concept of low income by itself. We have to focus on how do you get out of this business of low income into more moderate and higher income. And as I said earlier about human capital investments, if you can create opportunities for people to build their own businesses, to do higher end jobs by better understanding how they can better match their skills with what is available, they are the ones who will build the next generation businesses. They are the ones who will hire the next generation people. And gateway cities are wonderful instruments to foster that, because you have a lot of population in there that's highly qualified, that can actually be moved in the direction of creating new opportunities, new jobs, new industries, which then again eliminates the reason to have even the concept of low income. But that's my radical view.
Thanks. I'm Luke Schuster, director of Boston Indicators, a research center that works on a lot of these issues. It's clear that we need to do a whole lot of things to address these challenges: increase subsidy a whole variety of ways, improve the processes across the board. My question is just specific to the land use piece of the puzzle. And I've been thinking about the different types of commuter rail stations we have in our system. So the question is just going to compare a crude understanding of how it might work in two types of communities. In our kind of wealthier, high-income suburbs that also have a commuter rail station, it seems clear to me there, if we just legalize the production of modest multifamily housing like townhomes, triple-deckers, we could get a whole lot more modest housing on the market for basically no public subsidy at all. So that just seems like obvious low-hanging fruit. I'm curious how much we think revised land use in the gateway cities would also be sort of low-hanging fruit if we just allow for more development around stations in gateway cities. We can get a lot more without public subsidy, or are the dynamics just different enough there that you're not going to get much just from zoning reform?
And I'm going to add to that, well, the housing choice bill, but also which includes an accessory dwelling unit component. And there was an accessory dwelling unit measure in Salem that I know just got shot down. because they did not get the supermajority to actually pass it. But that's working in other cities. So I want someone to kind of talk to that. So.
With regard to your question, I've been working and observing gateway cities for maybe 30, 35 years. So the first is that I think the geography of decline is very different than the geography of growth. Right? And the geography of decline is not something that we have yet completely dealt with in the context of gateway cities. Right? There are vast amount of sort of pieces of land that continue entangled in a variety of legacy problems that have to deal with, brownfields, that have to deal with legal status, properties that are very difficult to clean up from the standpoint of legal proceedings, to just, put them back. And even when you put them back in the market, you never are going to get, as much as, you invested in just cleaning them up, right? So that's part of the clash between the geography of decline and the geography of growth and opportunity. And I think we need to take a little bit more of a closer look, at how some instruments that I've used in the past and that are now not necessarily doing the trick in terms of generating the growth at the neighborhood and the neighborhood level. So we, for example, Worcester Common Ground has a land trust, right? But the issue is that after maturing for about now 25 years, and some people are beginning to sort of move away from the housing that is in the land trust, we also have some problems because there's some significant caps with respect to how much equity can they extract, from the house they want to turn around. So there, I think we need to just do a little bit more of the nitty-gritty work of going into the neighborhoods and going to understand the geography, the clash between the geography of decline and geography of opportunity that is taking place in the gateway cities.
More sort of specific to what those transactions look like and whether there's enough room. We have two really powerful tools for capturing market value to drive affordability in Massachusetts. One is Chapter 40B, and it's designed to basically enable that where the market is hot enough to generate enough profit to subsidize the affordable units, the developers will develop, and the cross-subsidy creates affordable housing on the back of that market. We also have that's a faux pas, inclusionary zoning. And so in places like Cambridge and Somerville and Boston, we have inclusionary zoning requirements of 13 to 20%. If you're building housing, you need to build that much of it to be affordable. And that works there because the market is hot enough that it can be feasible. But it doesn't work in a market where you don't have enough profit in your transactions. And if the transaction's not penciling out, then it's not going to work to require the developer to cross-subsidize because they just won't build. And when I was at Mass Housing, I launched and ran the Workforce Housing Fund, which I regret the name of because everybody is, working family, really, for the most part. So, but that program was very, very difficult to deploy in gateway cities because the market rents that were being developed were, as someone said earlier, very close to the rents you would collect on an affordable unit from what is a technically low-income person. I love to get rid of the phraseology. And so the market dynamics are critical, and I would love for us to find some new innovations like 40B that find ways to capture market value in order to subsidize the things that we as the public think are important to make happen, whether that's 5G, affordable housing, neighborhood serving retail, or workforce development.
So despite working in transportation, I actually spend a significant amount of time working on housing. I think one of the issues that I've seen, and I like to term it full spectrum housing, and it's mainly because we need full spectrum. We need everybody at different price points to be able to actually afford to live where they want to. I live in the city of Cambridge. We have been having the most vicious fight ever about zoning, and we're supposed to be this super progressive city, and the things that are being said by people who reside in that city about keeping out, I think most recently, those who don't deserve the amenities that the city has. Yes, I'll send you some news articles. But the big thing is, Yeah, but I think the big thing is we're not dealing with the equity issue. And we're not coming to the realization that transportation projects have created gentrification. Our transportation projects have cut communities in half. This has been going on for decades. So it's also, how do we actually deal with and come to the realization that we live in a segregated region? How do we own that? And then how do we start building projects and creating zoning that actually allows for the full spectrum? Within the 128 corridor, I have developers who are willing to lose the money just so they can build housing because they can't get tenants. So it's like when you have large-scale developers who are like, listen, I will take a loss, and are still having to go to court to get these communities to allow them to build. This is kind of, we need to have a kind of coming to Jesus moment about this and really start thinking about it regionally, and how do we create regional plans, regional policies, so we can actually address this, as opposed to arguing about this for decades, trying to force municipalities not to just do the right thing, but to actually create communities in which everyone can live.
Just one quick thing, Tracy. I'm also a transportation person like Monica, and not as smart as Monica, but I think that one of the challenges here that we've got to again overcome in a regional, collective basis is I don't understand enough of this conversation. Like Luke, I followed your question and had just blank stare in my face if you were going to turn to me and ask me like how to address that, because as transportation planners, we don't do enough to learn about the impacts of our work on the housing crisis and how it affects our communities in that way, and we need to embed that understanding at younger and deeper levels throughout our teachings.
So I'm just going to make a plug here for comprehensive planning and statewide comprehensive planning, because I'm very dismayed to see some planning departments at universities either focusing just on land use or separating all these things out. And so I think that does also contribute to some of our challenges. I know we had at least one more question. Who has the mic? Go ahead.
Greetings, my name is Jasmine Tatum. I am just back to Worcester about 2 years ago. I was born and raised here. My hat that I wear most often is I call myself a wealth entrepreneur. I came from advertising and marketing spaces, forging partnerships across the board, so this isn't foreign to me in that regard. As I've come home, you pick up these seeds from around the world. How dare you not come home to plant them? I was lucky to live in New York City and LA, and obviously you know that both of those markets are on the precipice of gentrification, and you see what happens when comprehensive planning, to your point, doesn't happen at what I call the hyper-local global approach, right? It's like, how are we hyper-focused on what we have, who we have, and activating those spaces. So as I come home to Worcester and I look around, I see a lot of vacant lots. And my mind starts going, my wheels start turning, and I start to leverage relationships and partnerships that I've built in artist communities and business communities around the world, and come up with this concept. And I'm in a very interesting position because I don't have to worry about the financing of this. What I'm worried about, or not even so much worried about, what I find challenging is the red tape. How difficult do you think it is to activate a vacant lot for 2 years and throw up some shipping containers? And surprisingly, it's pretty challenging. There's no precedent in this city, and leveraging precedent from other markets that are doing this successfully is not enough of a push to get both. Private sector is more keen on innovation and disruption and concepts, right? Facebook being a concept company. When you talk about activating vacant space as public space, the conversation gets a little tricky. So my question to the panel is, how would you recommend somebody like me to get, I'm very invested in my community, right? I don't want to take this concept to a big market like New York, where all of my developer friends are like, hey, come on, let's go now. I want this to be here, and it's really about wealth. Like I said, I call myself a wealth entrepreneur because I believe our health is our wealth, and that's community wealth, right? The idea about low-income spaces, that does not help our community thrive. So when we talk about these conversations, and it's very, very focused around affordable housing and not so much around mixed-use development, I wonder, what are your recommendations? Somebody is here, hand raising to do the work, and how do you propose we all can work together to get it done at a comprehensive level, in the spirit of partnership, of course.
Well, I'm not sure if I can answer your question completely, but I'll give you an example of how something like that can be addressed. About 7 or 8 years ago, we took on a blighted building in a city, a gateway city, that had one convenience store in a 40,000 square foot space that used to get broken into every 2 weeks. But the idea was that we would create a property where you would have education, you would have technology, you would have medical services, and we very carefully picked the tenants so that we can handle the parking issues. And in about 5 years, we were able to go from 0 tenancy to full tenancy. And that has created literally from 2 jobs at the convenience store, almost 140 plus jobs coming into that building. There is a public bus transportation stop, which used to be there before, but people come in and go, and it's become a hub. In fact, it has allowed to develop the rest of the area as well. So the important thing about real estate and development is you don't just look at it from a point of view of rental income, but you have to look at it from a point of view of societal value. What value does it provide the society? And what we did was that there was a large Southeast Asian population in that area who didn't really have a lot of retail outlets where they could come in for their native ice creams or what have you. And we allowed them to come in. And they are now treating that as a hub for a lot of the activities they do in the evenings and the weekends. So the important thing about, again, in my humble view, is that whenever we look at any vacant lot or we look at a building that is not getting populated, you have to look and see what can you do with this building from the point of view of job growth, giving opportunities to people to start small businesses. And the interesting thing is, every tenant that we took was a startup. It was a husband-wife team from a university who wanted to start an ice cream place. We helped them how to build a business. There was a husband-wife team who started a medical practice store thereafter, working in a hospital for all these years. So you have to help as a developer the businesses to grow. And when you get that level of, as I said earlier, synthesis of information, you can grow any kind of vacant lot or blighted building or less populated building in any community in the state.
I want to answer an important element of your question. Is anywhere here from City Hall, here locally, from Worcester? Yeah, anyone? Worcester. Yeah, raise a high. Now, I've heard the mayor I've heard the local mayor a lot talking about how they want to revitalize this area. So the first thing I would say is you have a local champion. And I would ask you to go to the mayor's office and City Hall and say, you said you want us to come back home and revitalize. I am from the community. Why is this happening? That's number one. Number two, there's an entire ecosystem here in this region and also nationally of artists and those who are in development. And so if you want to be tied to them, come talk to me. We can give you some best practices. And one of the key elements, I see a bunch of foundations here. I won't call them out. But there are a number of foundations who are doing a lot of work on how to activate vacant spaces. And so I would say tie into those ecosystems, because oftentimes what happens is you are out there, you're having a conversation with 5 or 7 friends, and you're like, we're trying to get this deal. The person in this particular zoning or permitting office is not returning my calls. They're not responding to my emails. And you feel disenchanted. And you don't have the right partnerships. Know that in this room, there are people who can help you. And I'm telling you right now, there are people on this panel who are saying, just come talk to us. Okay? There we go.
All right, I think we are out of time. Unfortunately, we're having some really great conversations right now. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a promise that in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to put together some sort of technology tool so that our experts here, as well as our experts here, can connect and ask these kinds of questions of each other to say, hey, we are trying to figure out how to activate this vacant space. We're trying to figure out how to get more of our small businesses connected. What are you doing in your communities? And then that way we can share some of the best practices and start doing some collective action around promoting mobility, development, and growth in our gateway cities. So unfortunately, we can't continue that conversation right now. I invite you to go mingle, enjoy that conversation. I hope those of you who are staying for the lunch are going to be energized by the conversation we're going to have there as well. But thank you very much for showing up this morning. Had a great time, and I would love your feedback. Thank you. And thank you to our panelists and to our speaker this morning.